Do we have our presenters here? We got Bev, we got Jerry's video. I think we've got everybody. Should we start?
Just give me 1 minute and then we'll be ready to go.
Okay, it's a deal.
Do we have
Hi, Liz.
Hi, Lindsay here.
Lindsay, how are you feeling?
Good, great,
Excellent.
terrific.
Glad to hear that. We had a positive vote last night from the city council.
Yes, we did. Very exciting votes.
Yeah, that took a while, didn't it? 18 months?
Yeah. It was a lot of ups and downs, but they did a good job.
There was. Hi, Stephanie. Are you muted, Stephanie? I think so.
Just figured, hello, I didn't need to unmute, but.
Good to see you tonight.
Yep, we're good. This is good. I missed the chat, and so I have a couple people in Facebook world looking for this too, so.
Oh, good.
Great.
Well, I'm glad I could make you all aware of the article in the Sun today. And the video that we'll start with is from that the author of that column, Jerry Davich. And then we'll move to Bill Foster to share his experiences. And yeah, I know I've heard your story, Bill, though, about your father's involvement in the civil rights era. Pretty marvelous role model for you.
Yeah, well, you know, he started out as a scientist, and either he went off the road or on the road. You have to decide. But
well, you've spoken of him often, and I know you've got some interesting things to share at the national level. What's going on?
oh,
You ready, Nick?
Yep,
Are you still?
you can get started.
Okay. For all of you on the call this evening, welcome to Indivisible Naperville. This is our August meeting. In the past years, we have taken the summer months off from Indivisible Naperville, but it didn't seem like a good idea to do that this summer. Tonight's meeting will help add dimension to our discussion of hate crimes, not only nationally, but statewide and even locally. And I've got a couple of newspaper articles. I'm just going to summarize a little bit from them. One was from the AP on July 12th, that since the virus took hold of the US in March, at least in California, and I don't know what the national outlook looks, but in California, there's been a rise in anti-Asian aggression and violence from people blaming our Asian friends and neighbors for the virus. On July 1, there were 832 incidents of discrimination and harassment that have been tracked, and that was in the previous 3 months. So you're looking at, I think it's April, May, and June. In those 3 months, 832 acts of aggression against Asian Americans in California. That was on July 12th. July 21, the Daily Herald reported a hateful homophobic vandalism against the LGBTQ+ community in Wheaton in a park. And of course, we don't need to be reminded of all that's happened in Naperville. We've had 3, 4, 5 incidents, and those are the ones we know about. And it has caused our community, though, to come together to form avenues for outreach and communication that I think have been pretty impressive. Naperville Neighbors United in particular, led by Councilman Benny White and his wife, Kim. I serve in that leadership team, and they've done amazing work in our community. Our school districts have as well. The community, the city council has, with new resolutions that have been adopted and new commissions that are being formed. We are not turning our backs to what we've seen in our own community, and I'm very proud of Naperville. And we're going to start with Nancy Turner, who will give us a little overview of the format for the evening, and then we'll move to Bev George, who will introduce the video by Jerry Davich. Nancy? Uh-oh, there she is. Unmute, Nancy.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. I thought Nick was going to do that. So Nick Unajeski is the Senior Regional Organizer for Indivisible for Northern Illinois and Northwest Indiana. He will be our tech guru tonight and moderator. He will also handle the questions in the Facebook live stream. So if you have any questions, you could either put them in the chat on Zoom or the comment section on the Indivisible Naperville Facebook page. Each speaker tonight will be introduced by an Indivisible Naperville leader who will also monitor the time. Our goal is to wrap up in time for our next Vice President's speech. And next up is Bev George.
Good evening. I'm happy to introduce Jerry Davich this evening. He can't be here as we've said, but he sent a wonderful video, which I had the privilege of watching a little earlier. Jerry Davich is a skilled writer, storyteller, a columnist, a radio show host, a public speaker, and he's written 3 books. He lives in Valparaiso, Indiana, and he began his career in 1995 as a political cartoonist and a columnist. Since 1997, Jerry Davich has won more than 50 state and national awards for various journalism organizations. From August 2006 to the present, he's been a columnist with the Chicago Tribune media. He's a gifted reporter and writer. He seeks to shine a light on society's darkest corners and offer a voice to the voiceless. Jerry Davich never leaves home without a pen, a notebook, and curiosity. His most recent column in the Chicago Tribune last Friday focused on our emotional depletion, our national narrative of negativity, and the all too familiar refrain we hear from our friends, "I'm honestly just exhausted." We're pleased to have him join the conversation tonight via his video. So let's see that next. I can't hear him.
Uh-oh. Okay, we need to get this fixed.
No sound?
No sound. Okay, good. Nick, can you fix that?
Let me try it again.
Hello, my name is Jerry Davich. I'm a columnist with Chicago Tribune Media and the Post-Tribune, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of this important program tonight. And I apologize I can't be there in person, but I'm out of town. Over the past 25 years, I've written extensively on the subject of hate crimes, racism, and race relations, even more so since the May 25th death of George Floyd, which reframed and enraged the Black Lives Matter movement. After nearly every column I've written on this complex and volatile topic, I've heard from hateful, bigoted readers. This is just one form of hate mail I received in the mail recently. It came camouflaged in an ordinary white envelope. You, Jerry, are a bootlicker when it comes to the N-word, although it didn't whitewash the N-word like I just did. It was hate that compelled the racist who contacted me to type out a letter, neatly fold it, slide it into an envelope, put postage on it, and mail it. The one-page letter contained vulgar, racist, nonsensical ramblings. The envelope had a bogus name and a bogus return address, confirmed for me by police. I felt compelled to write about it to shine a light on the darkness of hate. Hate still comes in all forms, obviously, even cowardly letters to newspaper columnists who write about the topic routinely. This type of hate-filled reader feedback to me has been more conspicuous and more frequent in recent years, in part sparked by our president's rhetoric. As a middle-aged white man from a predominantly black city, I've witnessed both spectrums of hate, from victims and perpetrators alike, including jailhouse interviews with hate-filled murderers, as well as those people who don't really realize they're even acting on their hate, or maybe they're in denial. Amid the racial unrest in our country, we should keep in mind that hate isn't strictly about race, but also against marginalized groups of any kind. Faggots like you would carry the banner for those expletive gays, the racist also wrote in his letter to me. He must be one of those equal opportunity hate mongers. He must hate all kinds of people, anyone who doesn't look, act, pray, and hate like him. He typed out his hatred on a computer, then printed it and dated it at the top. as if he was writing to his grandmother. That's the intriguing aspect about hate and hateful actions. It demands our time. It takes effort. It takes energy. It consumes those who choose to feel it and to act on it again and again and again. Just as it has throughout the history of our species. The state of hate in Naperville, Illinois, in our country, and within our species, is a never-ending battle of good versus evil, hopes versus habits, and idealism versus realism. It's important to keep in mind that public dialogue such as tonight's forum can tilt the scale by addressing a topic most of us would likely prefer ignoring or whispering about to each other in private. I'm often asked by readers what we can do to stand up to hate or to address hate. And I think what we can do is we say something about it. We could stand up against it by not silently condoning it or conveniently ignoring it. This is why I write about it, to shine a glimmer of light on its inherent darkness. And this is why I applaud tonight's forum to spotlight what's being done to address it. When I bumped into this 25-year-old black man at a public park, he gave me a hateful look. I asked him about it, and it led to a column. We can't turn back the clock to erase our sins, flaws, and mistakes. However, we can be more honest with each other about the issue of hate. One last thing to keep in mind is that I will likely receive some kind of hate mail or correspondence from readers or viewers just for taking part in this program and writing about this in my newspaper column. It may not be an old-fashioned letter like this that I received earlier, but it'll come. It always does. Thank you again for your time tonight, and thank you especially to Indivisible Naperville for inviting me to this forum and for allowing me to share my experiences. I appreciate it. Have a good night.
Thank you to columnist Jerry Davich for his video introduction of this complex and disturbing topic. It's an honor this evening to introduce Congressman Bill Foster, who will speak next and whose district includes most of the Naperville area. Prior to serving in Congress, he led teams of engineers and physicists to help build the latest round of Fermilab's giant particle accelerators. Congressman Foster has represented Illinois and Washington since 2008, first for the Illinois 14th District and then the 11th District. He currently serves on the House Committee on Science and Space Technology and the House Financial Services Committee. May I present Congressman Bill Foster.
Well, thank you. And now, how many people noticed the painting on the wall behind him in that video?
Yeah, the finger touching.
No, the finger not quite touching.
Not quite, yeah.
The symbolism that is that we were almost touched by God and so that was a very interesting. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it worked well with the subject of tonight's meeting. Well, for those of you who might not know me, I'm Congressman Bill Foster, as was mentioned. I'm best known as being, the scientist in Congress. Actually, before that, I was in business, and it was in the theatrical stage lighting business. And there's always been a lot of diversity in the theater, particularly gender diversity in the theater. And it was when I was there, very active 40 years ago now, it was very different being a gay person in the United States. And so anytime I get depressed about, it's just as bad as it's ever been, and it's not really getting better, I think of some of the people that I knew back there in theater, who were, in the closet and deep in the closet. And even if their friends knew, they were still hiding it from their parents. And it was, it dominated their life. And I don't want to see it ruin their life, but it made their life incomparably harder. And, when I see especially young kids now, they're much less afraid of letting the world know, who they are. And so because it's a big part of what the hate crimes that are happening today. You saw just on the news this evening, 3 trans individuals were beaten up in the Hollywood Walk of the Stars, and it got on video and went, this is not done, but it's also, I don't believe, as bad as it used to be. And well, before I get off the tracks, I did spend a little effort preparing some remarks, and I'll try that. And I just want to thank Indivisible Naperville for inviting me here. This is an important conversation to have, as a community, because as was mentioned, there is no community in America, including our own, that's exempt from the reality of hate and discrimination. And so it's good that we keep talking about it, because that's the best first line of defense against this. For me, the pursuit of justice was always ingrained from an early age. As many of you may know, in addition to being a scientist and businessman, I'm also the son of a civil rights lawyer. My dad actually wrote a lot of the enforcement language behind the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But he didn't start out as a civil rights lawyer. He actually started out as a scientist. And then during World War II, he started, he designed fire control computers for the Navy, and as a result started getting these reports of how many people were killed each week by his team's equipment. And he understood the justice of World War II, but was just deeply uncomfortable with the idea that his technical skills were being used to hurt people. So he came back from the war. He'd grown up in the South, where he saw a lot of things he did not like about how blacks were treated in Tennessee, where he grew up. And he saw the civil rights movement as the great moral challenge of his generation. And so he stepped away from his career in science and became a civil rights lawyer. He was not, I could say something about John Lewis, which will be missed. But my dad wasn't a protester. He knew Martin Luther King and Ralph Abernathy and Medgar Evers. Dad had dinner with Medgar Evers and his wife at their kitchen table about 6 weeks before Medgar Evers was shot down in his driveway. And so I was within 1 degree of separation of true hate crimes. My dad, once or twice when I was growing up, my dad would be working on civil rights down in the South. And he would come back to the hotel and find a note on the bed that says, if you value the life of your family, you better get the heck out of town, which he did not do. And so as a result, there was this not very happy phone call between my mom and my dad. And then we would all pack in the car and spend a week at my grandparents'. So we never suffered directly. It was just a threat. But it's, and so I can't claim it's anything like people that continue to suffer from hate crimes today. But I can imagine situations where that exists, and at least remember the fear in my mother's voice when Dad told her what was happening. But things actually are. There are ways in which they get better, and I think the first most important thing is to actually talk about it. And so that's why I'm so glad that all of you are you're coming together to talk about this. I'm very proud of some of the legislation that we have passed. There was the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act that I supported. There's a large, the Disarm Hate Act, which would prohibit the sale of firearms to anyone who's been convicted of a hate crime. And things like that are incremental steps forward. But I think the big step forward is to actually understand what the source of this is in the human psyche. I think it's unfortunately it's built into humans. A lot of it is just tribalism. If you look at these the documentaries on the behavior of chimpanzee tribes, there's a lot of human behavior that you recognize directly in that. And and we just have to say, okay, we understand that's part of how we evolved, but that's not the way that we're going to live our lives. We're going to recognize it. We're going to look it in the eye and just say, okay, I understand why I'm programmed to have those feelings, but I am, I'm not I'm more than an ape. And I'm going to look past the feelings that are programmed inside me and try to actually make a society that works properly. So anyway, I'm happy to, when we return to questions about the details of what's happening in our, in our local area. And, but it's an important thing. And thank you, Diane, and everyone for organizing this effort.
Thank you, Bill.
So I have the privilege next to introduce two folks to you tonight. The first of which is State Representative Stephanie Kifowit. She proudly served her country in the United States Marine Corps, served the residents of the city of Aurora as alderman for over 9 years, and now is a full-time state representative of the 84th House District, serving the residents of Aurora, Montgomery, Naperville, and Oswego. Stephanie and her husband, Steve, an Army veteran, have 2 children, Sabrina and Samuel. Representative Kifowit is a proud alumna of Northern Illinois University and graduated with a BS in political science and a master's in public administration. She is currently serving on the following committees: State Government Administration, for which she is the chairperson; Veterans Affairs, chairperson; Appropriations, General Service, vice chairperson; Adoption and Child Welfare, Revenue and Finance, Income Tax Subcommittee, Agency Operations Subcommittee, sub-chairperson, and the Government Process Subcommittee. The other person that I am introducing to you all tonight is Sadia Covert, who is a DuPage County Commissioner in District 5. She was elected recently in 2018, and currently she is the chair of the Complete Count Committee and the Strategic Planning Committee. She also sits on the Finance, Legislative, Judicial Police, Safety, Stormwater Development, and Economic Development Committees. TV timeout. These ladies are working hard for all of us. I'm not finished. As a commissioner, Sadia has successfully passed 3 resolutions in her first 6 months of office. Her first was to include diversity and inclusion as a core imperative in the county's strategic goals, which passed unanimously. She also passed a resolution to create the Complete Count Committee for the 2020 census. And lastly, she helped with the passing of a resolution that created closed captioning for the hearing impaired. She continues her work in the area of diversity and inclusion through the various committees she sits on and closely monitors the county's progress. She is the co-author of the amendment to the current hate crime law in Illinois, which was unanimously passed in the state legislature. She continues to do her hate crime and diversity training as a state certified law enforcement instructor and has trained over 1,800 law enforcement officials in Illinois, including for the FBI and the FBI National Academy. Sadia is an attorney and partner at Covert Covert LLP, practicing business law, foreclosure defense, and civil litigation. She is married and a mother of 3 wonderful children. Again, I am overly impressed with these ladies' accolades, and thank you. Go ahead.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Diane, for having me on today with this very important subject. A lot of our legislation comes from residents, which is why I was very honored and blessed to work with Sadia on updating our hate crime bill and on working with people in the community to strengthen our laws. As Bill said, unfortunately, we have a lot of laws on the books, and I think you'll hear from Bob Berlin about those laws being enforced, but at the ground level, we need to work to fight hate, to instill upon our children the right and wrong, and to really work as a community to come together and to address this sickness that is infiltrating our community at great lengths. A lot of the bill works at identifying and educating individuals that do engage in hate crimes. And then what we also found is when somebody destroys or marks up a building, such as putting swastikas on a Jewish synagogue, that was only criminal damage to property, and we made that as part of a hate crime as well. And, you know, we've all had our experiences. When I heard Jerry reading the mail he's gotten, I mean, social media is just the devil's spawn of hate. I've gotten so many posts on social media that I should boil in cat piss, I think was the most creative one that I got, along with derogatory female statements, derogatory female words, and so being in public office is I guess similar to Jerry being a columnist. People believe that it is their right to lash out in very hateful and despicable ways. And unfortunately, on social media, some of the people that were posting on my social media page that I eventually had to take down were not even from Illinois. They're from Ohio and New Jersey and other states, and they feel like it's their right to share their opinion no matter how grotesque it is. But the law that we passed, I'm very proud of working with Sadia. She helped put together the concepts and the ideas, and then we put it in law form, and she came down and testified. And this is what, this is your government at work for you as residents. We take your input and we work to help put these great ideas that everybody has into legislation. And I think the amendment and the updates to the hate crime law in Illinois is made it stronger, made it better, and focused on education and really focused on trying to make a difference. So again, I'm just honored and pleased to be here. And, you know, I just enjoy working with everybody in the community. Sadia, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. I thank you, Stephanie, for just being such a huge support. And we worked together when I was not on the county board. I was just, you know, an ordinary citizen trying to get help. And Stephanie, Representative Stephanie Kifowit, listened. And she was so sincere about it, and it was amazing. And I just love working with strong, intelligent women in government. It's just, it's an honor to work with her. I also want to thank Indivisible Naperville. Thank you, Diane McGuire, for inviting me to this really important event. I'm a little sad that you know, hate crimes are still happening. It, you know, it has its waves, and you think, you know, you try to work against it every day and you try to educate people, but it's something that we can't stop working at. We have to continue to work for it. And I'm always a proponent of education and educating, trying to educate hate and bias away by, you know, however we can train people. We have implicit bias training, we have diversity training, whatever we can do to cultivate that environment where, you know, we can't legislate thought, but we can legislate criminal actions. And I had a lot of criticism when I was working on this amendment to the hate crime law, that this is, you know, you're legislating freedom of thought. And my answer was, this is not freedom of thought. It's actually the crime affiliated with that thought. So if, you know, we saw the Charleston shooting, this all started with me, started in 2014 and 2015, where our Jewish synagogue at Chaim was vandalized by a hate crime perpetrator. And it was awful because it was so close to home. And then months later, there were 3 Arab Muslim dental students who were shot execution style because the perpetrator didn't like the way they looked. Then the Charleston shooting happened, and then there was an African-American man hung from a tree. There were a series of hate crimes that year that didn't even get to national news. It was all local news. It wasn't even really reported. And that's when and they weren't initially labeled as hate crimes, and that really bothered me. Because when you have a problem and you're not addressing it properly and labeling it properly, it's no longer a problem. You can't do research on it. You can't have accurate statistics. You can't monitor data. So that really bothered me. And I started gathering other communities and asking what their perspective was and how they were affected by hate crime. So I had this symposium at Benedictine University, and I had a variety of different communities come in to talk about their experiences with hate. And it's true, just like Congressman Foster said, hate affects everybody. It doesn't discriminate. So it was really interesting to learn about how hate affected these communities. And now we're seeing that hate is affecting the Asian community, our Asian neighbors, because of the coronavirus. So it may be a different group every year or every other year, but it seems, it has a pattern. It targets certain demographics according to the times. So the changes that we had in the current hate crime law, at the time, California was the strongest, but I believe we are the strongest now in the nation, the Illinois hate crime law. And the changes that we made was we have an educational component to it where perpetrators are required to take classes to learn about the communities that they committed an offense against. There's a civil lawsuit because proving hate, and State's Attorney Bob Berlin's gonna get into this more about, how it looks like in from a prosecutor's point of view and how to prove it. So there's a civil lawsuit. If you can't prove it in court, victims can go for a civil action instead, where the standard of proof is a little bit more, not lax, but it's a little lower than your reasonable doubt standard. And there's no caps on damages anymore. It used to be a cap of $1,000, and that's no longer there. However, I didn't get one thing that I really wanted out of the hate crime law. I wanted consecutive sentencing for perpetrators instead of concurrent sentencing, but it was enhancements were objected to by the ACLU, and that's okay. I mean, you don't get everything you want, right? So,
Sadia, I think in Springfield you got quite a bit. So
yeah, I know. I am grateful. It's a great law. It's the strongest law in the country right now. So I'm really proud of what we've done in Illinois. And again, thank you, Representative Kifowit and Senator Heather Steens as well, to also be one of the sponsors of the bill. So.
Okay, I get the have the opportunity to introduce Bob Berlin. He's our state's attorney here in DuPage County, a role he's had since 2010, I believe. Before that, he was also worked in the state's attorney's office in Cook County and in Kane County. He's had over 30 years experience as a prosecutor, and he's been recognized a number of times for his accomplishments in the courtroom. I met with Bob last year with Diane when we were discussing our sexual assault forum, and I found him to be a very compassionate and competent person who was prosecuting on behalf of the victims. And thank you for being here, Mr. Berlin, and excited for hear what you have to say.
Well, thank you very much, Kate. I appreciate that. And thank you, Diane and Indivisible Naperville for inviting me to attend this forum. I'm really honored to be here and talk about the law, the hate crime law, how we investigate these cases, how that law is applied, and a number of these successes that we have had in the county. I have a PowerPoint, and I'm gonna see if I can do this correctly. So give me 1 second. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, wonderful. Okay. There we go. Okay, so we start out with this. I've always been an advocate of victims, and I always talk about how crimes destroy communities and have a social cost on the entire community. Hate crimes have an especially brutal impact on the entire community, not just the victims of the hate crime, and it's not just the people who may belong or be part of that group that is victimized. It's the entire community that shares in that grief and in the fear that comes from hate crimes. So we have trained our police officers in the county on how to investigate hate crimes. They're different because, as I'll talk about, in order to prove a hate crime, we have to prove the specific motive. There has to be a predicate offense, whether it's a battery, an assault, or criminal damage to property, but we have to prove that it was committed by the reason of the victim's actual or perceived race or gender or nationality. So it's important for the police to gather as much evidence as they can, which includes getting into a defendant's cell phone and social media. So we assist them with getting search warrants to get into those devices to see what their communications are. We look to see whether the offense was committed around a particular holiday, whether the victim was engaged in some type of activities that promoted a certain religious or ethnic, national, sexual orientation or gender group. We look to see if other hate or bias crimes have occurred in that area. And all of these things are considered by us in whether we have sufficient evidence to charge a hate crime. This is Illinois' hate crime statute. And again, the most important thing here is the hate crime is committed when it's by reason of the actual or perceived race, color, creed, religion, ancestry, gender, sexual orientation, physical or mental disability or nationality of another person. So that person doesn't actually have to be part of that group as long as the offender actually perceives the person to be part of that group. And there can be other motivating factors as well, but we have to prove a specific motivating factor, and that being bias or hate, in order to prove hate crime. So Sadia Covert talked a little bit about the argument that we hear all the time, constitutional arguments against the hate crime law, and that is, well, this is just free speech. And there's a number of cases, including the Illinois Supreme Court and the US Supreme Court, which have held that hate crime does not punish expression, it does not punish speech, it punishes criminal conduct. And therefore, it does not violate the free speech clause of the Constitution. The other argument is that the statute impermissibly makes speech an element of the crime. And the courts, again, have concluded that even without evidence of bigoted speech, a hate crime can be proven as long as the jury concludes that the victim was chosen by reason of their actual or perceived race, color, creed, religion, or other core characteristics listed in the hate crime statute. As I said before, the victim does not actually have to be a member of the protected class. As long as the offender perceived the victim to be a member of that class, we can prove a hate crime. So again, it's thought versus conduct. And we heard a lot about this earlier. And this is the most important thing to remember is hate crime criminalizes criminal conduct. Obviously, we cannot charge a crime based on somebody's thought, however hateful or inappropriate it is. But when they act and they commit a crime because of that hatred or bias, that's when it becomes a hate crime. So what's the profile of your typical hate crime offender? The data indicates a small number of hate crimes are committed by members of organized groups. Your typical hate crime offender is between the ages of 14 and 24 years old, with no prior criminal record, neither impoverished nor chronically unemployed. What we have seen, and really across the country, hate crimes are pretty much divided into two categories. You have the predatory hate crimes and the opportunistic hate crimes. Predatory are committed by multiple offenders who actually plan to commit a biased motivated crime. The opportunistic hate crimes, a lot of these have mixed motives. They may start as a traffic altercation, words are exchanged, and then it turns into or escalates into a hate crime. And in DuPage County, I would say that most of the hate crimes that we have seen, I would put in that second category of the opportunistic type. So the textbook indicators of hate crime, obviously words, symbols that are used. We look, is the victim a member of a group? Is the defendant a member of a different racial or ethnic group? The history of hostility between these two groups. Did the victim just move into the area in which the incident took place? And again, did the incident coincide with any holiday or observance that might be of significance to a certain group or community? Has the victim or victim's group been involved in recent public or political activity that might make them a likely victim of hate-motivated violence? And the same thing with the offender. Does the defendant belong to a member of any particular group or organization? And of course, we look for the absence of any other motives that might explain this type of criminal activity. So again, it's the motivation for hate crime, not the victim's status, but the motivation has to be proved beyond a reasonable doubt. So typically, in most criminal offenses, we don't have to prove the motive when we talk about the elements of a crime. When we charge a hate crime, we do have to prove the motive, and we have to prove that along with the other elements of the crime beyond a reasonable doubt. We have, for a long time, even before I became DuPage County State's Attorney, we have a specific office policy that applies to hate crimes. And that is that the State's Attorney, First Assistant, and my Chief of Criminal have to be notified in all instances involving a hate crime. As is true in any violent crime, the Assistant State's Attorney must make personal contact with the victim and the victim's family members prior to the actual arraignment, prior to the first appearance in court, and again, always before any type of a plea offer. All hate crime plea offers have to be approved by the State's Attorney, by myself. And the only other crimes that we have in the county where that same policy holds true are first-degree murder cases. That's how serious we take hate crimes. So the penalties for hate crime. Typically, a first offense is a Class 4 felony, a Class 2 felony for a second or subsequent offense, unless it's committed in a specified place, such as a church, a synagogue, a mosque, or other building used for religious worship or religious purpose. There are other protected areas in the statute that also bump this up to a Class 3 felony. Class 4 felonies are punishable by probation or 1 to 3 years in the Department of Corrections, and a Class 3 felony is 2 to 5 years. A Class 2 would be 3 to 7. In addition, and this is part of actually the law that Representative Kifowit and Sadia Covert helped get passed in Illinois regarding restitution. There used to be a limit on the amount of restitution that was in the statute, and now the restitution is determined by the court based on the severity of the crime. It used to be $1,000, so now there is no limit. And even if an offender is sentenced to the Department of Corrections, they have to do community service, and there's an educational component as part of their mandatory supervised release, which in Illinois, that's what it's called in Illinois, it's parole. So really excellent additions to this statute. So just, I'm going to take a couple minutes just to run through some of the hate crimes that we have seen in DuPage County. So you have some idea of what's going on. Ranferi Bacillo, this was an incident that occurred in Lombard just a couple of years ago. The defendant was convicted of committing an assault on 3 African-American teenagers and a Hispanic teenager. He chased them out of a 7-Eleven with a knife, slashed their tires. He was sentenced to 2 years in the Department of Corrections. This was a juvenile offender, a highly publicized case where the victim was a Sikh, a member of the Sikh community. This started out as a traffic altercation, a road rage incident, and turned into a hate crime when the juvenile offender called the victim a terrorist and referred to the victim as bin Laden. This defendant was convicted in juvenile court, received 2 years probation and 15 days juvenile detention, as well as 200 hours of community service, which included service at the Sikh Community Center in Wheaton, as well as a significant amount of restitution. Miles Burton was convicted in 2012. This occurred at Elmhurst College. He carved a number of very disgusting slurs, racial slurs, into the window ledge of the only dormitory that was the residence of an Elmhurst College's only African-American dormitory supervisor. This was a trial, a bench trial in front of Judge Bacalus, and he was found guilty. Go back here. This is a case that's currently pending right now. This was also a highly publicized case. This defendant is charged with committing a hate crime and criminal damage to property against a Lyft driver. After he yelled, just because you're a Muslim, I'm going to kill you and snap your neck. This offender, Joseph Rapinski, was just recently charged just a couple of months ago in Lombard. He came outside of his residence. There were a number of people out on the street who had just been attending a graduation party. He was threatening them and told them to go back to the city. The victims were all African American. Eric Lewis at Good Samaritan Hospital in Downers Grove assaulted the hospital security officer who was African American, and when assaulting him, told the victim that he was going to hang him from a tree. And he was charged with a felony hate crime as well. And finally, again, a very highly publicized case that just occurred in Naperville just this past November. This was a juvenile on Craigslist who posted an ad with the photograph of the victim accompanied with the caption, "Slave for sale," followed by a very offensive racial slur. And this offender, this case is pending in juvenile court. So, Congressman Foster talked earlier about the importance of speaking out. And obviously, our elected officials, including myself, we're the ones who have the microphone, and it's so important that we do speak out. This is the press, from the press release, a joint press release that our office put out with the Naperville Police Department on the most recent hate crime in Naperville. And if you go back and you look at all of our office's press releases when there's a hate crime, you're going to see the same type of language. Because I can tell you, we send the message, we do not tolerate it in DuPage County. There is zero tolerance for crimes based on bias or hate because they're morally wrong. But as I said earlier, they destroy victims and they destroy communities. And we have been very aggressive in charging and prosecuting these crimes. We will continue to do so. I will say that, you know, compared to, stop the share here. There we go. I worked a number of years in Cook County when I first started as a assistant state's attorney. We have been fortunate that the number of hate crimes in DuPage County have been relatively small compared to other counties and other jurisdictions in the country. That being said, anything more than 0 is unacceptable. Again, a huge thank you to Indivisible Naperville for inviting me here. And again, a special thank you to Representative Kifowit and County Board Member Covert for all your work that you've done, helping it make it easier for us to prosecute these cases, and to Congressman Foster for all your work in this area.
All right, well, I think it is on to me next.
Yep.
We're going to wrap it up with questions. I know we're getting close to 8, so I want to make sure people have time to see the convention tonight. First, I'm going to kick it back to Representative Foster. Back in 2009, President Obama signed the Hate Crimes Prevention Act, and it really expanded the federal definition of hate crimes then. But have there been any measures to see if it's been effective since then in the last 10 years?
Well, I'm sure it's been studied. I'm actually going to have to get back to you on that. Sorry, we sort of have our head in trying to keep another 170,000 Americans from dying here. But there are, you know, this is a subject of study, and it's, you know, it's a very delicate thing trying to get, if you're going to get the counts right, you have to get the definitions right. And you can see in that Bob's excellent discussion of you know, the exact definition of these crimes. You know, it's tough. You know, a question I had for Bob is that how close, you know, in one of your examples, one of the perpetrators was screaming racial epithets at some kids that he was chasing out of a store. In that case, it's clear there's a emotional, or in that case, a racial animus. But does it have to connect directly? What happens if someone just tells a bunch of racist jokes and then a week later gets in a bar fight? You know, is that an allowable nexus if the person's a known racist and then happens to get in a bar fight with someone of a different race? How does that work?
So we would have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the victim of that fight was chosen because of race. So we could use what happened a week earlier. Any words that the offender or perpetrator may have used a week earlier would be evidence of a motive, but we have to prove the specific battery that occurs is the result of bias or hate.
Okay.
So it's never easy.
Sure, yeah, but it's not enough to say, well, everyone knows that this guy's a racist. That's not enough. He has to say, I'm going to go out and get in a fight with someone of some race, and then okay.
Correct.
But trying to get the counts right for that, and particularly when society is changing so fast, that you know, because it depends on eyewitnesses that maybe 5 years ago would have been afraid to step forward, and nowadays, you know, I hope people are braver about stepping forward when they see something like this happening. And so in that case, the counts would be going up, because more of it should be being detected. But actually, if you want to get back to Diane, we'll see if we can find some studies on exactly if the numbers have changed. But, you know, until the numbers go near 0, it's not acceptable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we just got one question in the chat too, and this one's probably better if we kick it over to Representative Kifowit. How are hate crimes increasing or decreasing in Illinois?
Well, we don't have, unfortunately, for this year, we've been battling COVID. I know the statistics have been there, and I can put that together for Julia or whoever else wants it. I apologize for not having those with us. As Sadia said, we have been seeing an increase in hate crimes against the Asian American community, with the president incorrectly labeling COVID-19 as the China virus. And we've been having increase of instances in the Asian American community with regards to that. And, but overall, the actual data and the actual numbers I don't have in front of me, mostly because a lot of my meetings are COVID related.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Sorry about that. There's only so much my brain housing group can keep in, and right now it's almost all about COVID.
Yeah, but what was mentioned about negative reactions towards Asians is something I have heard multiple places. That when the lockdown started and everyone was scared, if you happen to be East Asian, particularly when the president was saying what he was saying, it was you go into a store, you go into something, everyone is looking at you in a way different than what they used to. And that is real and new and ugly.
It is, and I've heard a lot from my colleague, Representative Teresa Ma. She represents Chinatown. She's the first Asian American to be elected to the Illinois House, and she has seen it firsthand, not only herself personally, but in her community that she represents, an increase of slurs and an increase of just overall hateful behavior towards that community.
Yeah, and on that, so I'm going to kick it to Sadia for the local take. We see these instances of hate crime in our own community, and as Indivisible, we're really united to have a grassroots coalition going forward and really fight for our values. So is there anything on the ground we could do to push for more unity and encourage diversity in our community?
Yes. There are many different ways to go about it. One of the ways that I was thinking of would be to collaborate and to connect with the other bigger organizations that are minority-based organizations, and to connect with them to make a strong network. So if there is somebody that is going through an incident, they could possibly file, one complaint in a centralized system where all the other minority organizations are connected together. So the complaint would go to one place, but all these different organizations have access to it and they view that. And then from that, you could have an action plan or a rapid response team to take care of it right away. So that's one of the things that I'm working with some people on right now, just grassroots at the local level. We just all have to work together as a community to fight against this.
Yep, I agree with you on that. So I think we're getting close to 8, so I think we got time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. So I'm gonna ask this one to Bob. We got a question in the chat. Can a hate crime be made against an ally of one of the groups identified in the statute?
Sure. A hate crime, anyone can be charged with a hate crime. They don't have to be a member of a specific group, or even allied with a specific group, as long as the predicate underlying offense, as long as we can prove that it was committed by reason of hate beyond a reasonable doubt.
All right, and then I think I'll do the last question for Representative Foster. So currently there's a nationwide uprising with Black Lives Matter as well, and the fallout from George Floyd's death. And we know that there's the Justice in Policing Act that is moving through the House now. So can you talk more about how this bill would address some of the inequities in our criminal justice system, particularly when it comes to police misusing their authority?
Yeah, Well, there's a long list of things, banning chokeholds, things like that. There, the frustrating thing about this is that there's a long list of things there that are never going to make it through the Senate. And so the key thing that we have to start with is what are the things that we can actually accomplish right now. And one of the things that would be a tremendous step forward, I believe, would just be to have body cameras 100% of the time. Anytime that you're stopped by police or any interaction with the police, there's 100% coverage of body cameras anywhere in the United States. That is something that turns out has tremendous amount of support on the Republican side of the aisle. And it's largely limited by money. Everyone recognizes that people behave better when they know there's a good chance they'll be on a camera, and a certainty they'll be on a camera. And so this is one thing that would help. Another thing is the qualified immunity doctrine, which I think has been abused, legally. It's a very complicated set of things. There's some understanding that if a public servant is doing something that turns out to be unconstitutional, but they thought it was okay at the time, and it was a reasonable assumption, then probably there should be some legal shield. The problem is that has been morphed into something that most people think is way too broad, and so you can just basically drive a truck through it, and it means that police and other public officials have very little accountability under a lot of circumstances. And so that's something where a modification to it. This is not a law. It is just something that the courts made up and have used over, it's evolved over time. And so I think that's a situation where there's some legal clarity so that what the real duties of a policeman are not only in their behavior, but also to educate themselves about what the state of the art is in terms of what's allowable and non-allowable conduct. So then there's a long list of things that are more obvious that I could go through if we had. I think we are 3 minutes over time right now, if I'm looking. So I don't want to go through this long list here.
Yeah, well, let's pass it to Stephanie because she can throw in some stuff from the state.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Congressman Bill Foster said and stress to how the state and the local governments have to work together. We passed in the state of Illinois for body cameras for all the police officers, and we left it to the local municipalities to equip their officers with body cams. As we found, such as in the city of Aurora, they have not equipped, even though it's been several years since we passed legislation, they have not equipped their officers all with body cams. And so this is where multiple levels of government need to be held accountable with regards to police and police reform. But we are looking at those subjects that Bill described on the state level as well. And we are working with the Black Caucus. So where the federal level might not be able to pass something, we're working on the state level to make sure in the state of Illinois that we have good policies in place for all our residents. I just wanted to get that little tidbit.
Yeah, and then on the body cams, there's a huge range in the state rules or even the local rules for when the body cameras have to be turned on. Because, there are times when it's appropriate to let the officers have discretion to turn it off, but there have been clearly abuses of that, of giving the officers a switch that without rules.
We wanted them to have discretion if they were going into somebody's house or if they were, situations.
Going to the restroom, I'll let them turn it off.
But certainly in circumstances we expect them to keep them on, and sometimes they're turned off, including with dash cams. All police officer cars should have dash cams, and there are situations where all of a sudden the dash cam is turned off or the audio of the dash cam is turned off. And so those things, they really need to be honed in through the policies of the police department or the municipal government, because the municipal governments do not want Springfield or Congress to be micromanaging their operations.
Yep. Yeah. On the other hand, if the federal government,
Whoops. We lost him.
Congressman Foster, you're muted.
Myself, sorry. And so, you know, if the federal government is going to pay for the body cams or the dash cams, then there's some minimum level of compliance on when they should be on that I think it's reasonable to expect.
So I think that is all the time we have for questions. So thank everybody for all your great responses. But I'll throw it to Diane because she's got some last words to wrap us up.
Actually, I'm going to throw it to Nancy. Nancy's going to give the closing.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank all of our speakers for all their hard work on this important topic. And I'd like to thank everyone for participating tonight. If we all stand up against hatred and say that hate has no home here, we can have a more unified community. And I would just like to mention on Saturday at 11 at the Washington Street Post Office, we're having a mini rally to help save the post office. If anyone wants to speak at this or knows someone who can speak, we'd be happy to have you. Basically, it's going to be more like a stand on every corner type rally with signs to show our support for the postal workers. And then our September meeting, the date is to be determined. It's going to be a candidate showcase starting at the top of the ballot with a Biden delegate and our congressional leaders down to our local candidates for DuPage County Board and Forest Preserve. So thank you, everyone. And I think we're all off to watch